So, as we've learned at the end of the 1920s, moving into the 1930s, the economic situation for the United States turned drastically downward. And so, with many banks going out of business, not being able to pay back the money that people had stored in the banks, not getting the loans, the money back from the loans that people had borrowed to buy new stocks. Once that stock market crashed, unemployment rose sky high. Okay, businesses lost money, were desperate to stay in business, so they had to begin to get rid of workers. And so unemployment rose sky high. Thousands of people lost their life savings in their homes. We're talking about with all the production that companies had just being less and less, we had companies needing fewer workers. And in the 3 years after the stock market crash, an average of 100,000 people lost their jobs every week during this time. So there's so many people losing their jobs. Even the people who had jobs often had to accept pay cuts and make less money than what they were used to. So many people, like it says, lost all their homes. They faced poverty and hunger for the first time in their lives. And this was uh, really a time where people didn't know what to do. So here's a picture of crowds outside of the Bank of the United States in New York City after its failure in 1931. People are demanding that they get their money that was in the banks, that in this situation, they didn't have anything left. And so they went to the banks to get what they had been storing in the bank, and there was none to be had because the businesses um, all went out of business, but the banks did too. And so there was no money to pay back. So here's a famous picture. This picture, Dorothea Lange is a photographer, and she took a picture of, it's called The Migrant Worker. It was a mother that she asked if she could snap some pictures here, and it just shows the despair and desperation and not knowing what to do. The kids are hungry and starving, and she's having to figure out how to even survive. Obviously, it seems like they don't have a home. This really represents this time period, what many families and many mothers or fathers were going through, just trying to find anything they could to um, protect their family, to feed their family, to shelter their family. And so here is impoverished American family. This was in Oklahoma. They lived in a shanty town, like basically any sort of cardboard or wood or metal framing. They just built anything that was shelter that they had. So the living conditions were very less than ideal, that were very minimal of what they had just to sleep at night and to be covered from any sort of weather that they might need protection from. In addition to this situation, you have something called the Dust Bowl. More than 750,000 farmers, three-fourths of the way to a million farmers, lost their farms during this time. Farmers in the Great Plains, this is kind of in the central area of the United States where we talk about Oklahoma and Kansas and part of Texas, and in the middle there, um, the Great Plains were hit with these droughts. There was no rain and everything dried up. The soil, the topsoil, could not hold anything. If you were to try to plant something, it was just dust blowing around. And so much of this blew around and away in the land. There's pictures here during the Dust Bowl of just, that's just the topsoil being blown around. And you have here in the Great Plains areas where it's all flat land, there's not trees, there's nothing protecting or preventing the wind from blowing this around. And you have homes. This is the top of a home here, completely covered. And so the Dust Bowl, the skies would turn black with dry blowing dust covering everything. Oklahoma and Kansas were hit hard, and many families, they had very little left, and they packed up everything they could that they had left, and headed out to California. So that was a very common destination because California was still growing. There was lots of opportunities there for different things, including farming. And so many people in this area in the Midwest and in the Great Plains packed up and left for California. Once again, here's some pictures, just machinery buried from the dust that came sweeping through. Here's a picture of the dust storm, and this is 1935 coming through. Imagine what it would be like to see that coming towards you and towards your home. So, as we've talked a little bit about, Herbert Hoover was the president during the beginning of the 1930s, during the beginning of the Great Depression. So he believed that private charities, local communities, basically people that lived in the community should help each other out. They should help the needy. It wasn't the government's job to help out. So the United States government, the federal government, really took a hands-off approach and said, listen, the communities need to take care of each other. And so many people believe that Herbert Hoover did very little, did not do enough to help Americans during the Great Depression. There were some things that were passed and some support and aid given, but really it was pretty minimal. And so many people blamed Herbert Hoover for their predicament. And there he is, being sworn in. And so thousands of Americans could not pay their mortgages. They lost their homes. They were forced to live basically in these cardboard little shacks that they built in parks. And so there were plenty of parks just filled with these cardboard shacks, and they were known as Hoovervilles. Basically, once again, showing that people blamed Herbert Hoover for their downturn and the fact that they had nowhere to go. Empty pockets, if you pull out your pockets, those were called Hoover flags. And newspapers that were blowing around that people would cover themselves just at night, those were called Hoover blankets. So here you could see these little shanty towns, these Hoovervilles, where anything they could build, just very minimal, almost like a little shed here. Imagine living in an area like this, maybe a whole family. It was very difficult times. And so you talk about not having any money, they didn't have food. And so many Americans, the fact that they had no work, they had no money, and they couldn't buy food. So there were organizations and churches and different places that tried their best to help out and provide for the needy. And so people would line up at these soup kitchens, they were called. They were run by charities, and really the soup was just some warm water and very minimal broth. There's very little to it, not a whole lot of meat. And so people would wait in line for hours just to get a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and that's probably all they had to eat that day. And so there's dramatic pictures of just wrapping around of people waiting. This is a famous picture you can see up here. It says free coffee and donuts for the unemployed, free soup. You could see here, this is what was people waiting to go in a soup kitchen. This is actually a picture similar to the one on the test that you'll have to identify what this is. So they're all going into a soup kitchen. And there it is. These are many people that are homeless. This is their only meal. And look at this. They're passing out food. This is the line. You could see starting way over here, wrapping around the entire block here and going, just people waiting for their one meal in the day. And these charities did their best to help out and keep up, but the government did not really fund a lot of this. So once again, along with Herbert Hoover, communities had to bond together and work together and help each other out. There was some government aid, but for the most part, people just could not find jobs. And you're talking about 25%. It got up to 25% unemployment. 1 out of every 4 people that wanted a job could not find one. And so that's when FDR came around. FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was elected in 1932. Okay, his whole thing is, listen, the government can help people out. We've got a deal for you, a new deal, he called it, where we are going to help you get through this. Times are going to get better. So Hoover believed that the government shouldn't interfere with the economy, but Roosevelt's the opposite. He said the government needs to get involved. And so FDR's government took a very active role in trying to get the economy to recover. So there he is in 1933, and we're going to learn about his New Deal program in the next coming days.